She was sold with a sack over her head until a cowboy lifted it and saw an angel. The rope bit into her wrists as rough hands shoved her forward. Grace couldn't see through the burlap sack covering her head, couldn't breathe properly in the stifling heat of the Arizona territory. She stumbled on the wooden platform, and laughter erupted from the crowd below. "What's under there, Charlie?" someone shouted. "You'll see soon enough," the auctioneer replied. $100 to start." Grace's heart hammered against her ribs. 3 weeks ago, she'd been traveling west with her uncle's wagon train. Then the attack came at night. Bandits killed everyone except her. They'd kept her alive for this moment, to sell her like cattle at this outlaw trading post deep in the territories where law didn't exist. 150, a gruff voice called out. 200, another answered. The bidding continued while Grace fought against the panic rising in her throat. Her father had been a preacher back in Missouri. He taught her to pray in dark times. But right now, prayer felt like shouting into an empty canyon. 500, a new voice cut through the chaos. It was different from the others. Younger. Steadier. The crowd went quiet. "Well now," Charlie said. "That's a serious bid. Anyone want to go higher?" Silence answered him. Sold to the cowboy in the back. Footsteps approached. Grace tensed, expecting more rough handling. Instead, gentle fingers worked at the rope around her wrists. The knots loosened. Then hands reached for the sack over her head. Light flooded her vision as the burlap lifted away. Grace blinked hard, and the first thing she saw was a pair of steady blue eyes and a sun-weathered face. The cowboy was maybe 25, with dark hair curling under a worn hat. He wasn't smiling, but something in his expression made her breath catch. It wasn't cruelty or desire. It looked almost like recognition. "You all right?" he asked quietly. Grace opened her mouth, but no words came. She'd expected a monster. This man looked at her like she was a person. "Jake Sutton," he said, still studying her face. "We need to leave. Now." He took her elbow, not roughly, but with clear purpose, and guided her down the platform steps. The crowd parted grudgingly. Grace noticed several men glaring at Jake with open hostility. "That's a lot of money for damaged goods, Sutton," someone called out. Jake didn't respond. He kept walking, keeping Grace close to his side. They reached a hitching post where a gray mare waited patiently. "Can you ride?" Jake asked. "Yes," Grace managed. Her voice came out hoarse. "Good. We've got about 5 minutes before they remember I'm not supposed to be here." He helped her mount, then swung up behind her. His arm came around her waist to grab the reins, and Grace stiffened. "I'm not going to hurt you," Jake said, "but those men will. Hold on." He kicked the mare into a gallop. They tore out of the outlaw camp, dust rising behind them. Shouts erupted from the buildings, followed by gunshots. Jake bent low over Grace, shielding her with his body as bullets whined past. The mare ran hard, leaving the camp behind. They rode for what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes before Jake finally slowed the horse. They'd entered a canyon with red rock walls rising on both sides. "They'll follow," Jake said. "But this canyon splits 3 ways up ahead. Should lose them." Grace found her voice. "Why did you buy me?" "Didn't buy you. You're not property." He paused. "I've been tracking that gang for 6 weeks. They killed my brother and his wife 2 months back. When I heard they had a girl they were going to sell, I figured she deserved better than whatever fate they had planned. So you paid $500. Had it saved up for a ranch. Guess that'll wait." Grace twisted to look at him. "You spent your ranch money to save a stranger?" Jake met her eyes. His expression was unreadable. "My brother always said the measure of a man is what he does when nobody's watching." Well, I was watching. Couldn't walk away. Something shifted in Grace's chest. This man with steady eyes had given up his dreams to pull her out of hell. "Thank you," she whispered. Jake nodded once. "We're not safe yet. Those outlaws don't like losing. And Charlie Burns, that auctioneer? He's the one who killed my brother. He'll want revenge now that he knows I'm alive." "You came to that camp knowing they'd recognize you?" "I came because they wouldn't expect it. Sometimes the boldest move is the safest." They rode deeper into the canyon as the sun began to set, painting the rocks gold and crimson. Behind them, somewhere in the fading light, dangerous men were saddling up. The chase had only just begun. The mare's hooves echoed off canyon walls as darkness fell. Jake guided them through the split he'd mentioned, taking the middle path while the other 2 branched away like fingers. Grace held on to the saddle horn, every muscle aching from tension in the hard ride. "There's a cave about 2 miles up," Jake said. "We can rest there tonight. They won't track us in the dark." "How do you know this area so well?" "Grew up not far from here. My brother Daniel and I used to explore these canyons when we were kids. Our pa ran cattle on the range just north of this territory. Grace felt the grief in his voice. I'm sorry about your brother. Jake was quiet for a moment. Daniel was the good one, always saw the best in people. He and his wife Rebecca, they'd only been married a year. They were heading to start a homestead when Burns and his gang ambushed them for their wagon and supplies. That's how you knew about the gang. I've been hunting them ever since. Picked up their trail, learned their habits, found out they were holed up in that trading post about a week ago. He paused. Then I heard about you. The canyon narrowed ahead and Jake slowed the mare to a walk. Grace could barely see in the darkness, but Jake seemed to know every turn. Finally, they reached an overhang with a deep recess in the rock face. Here, Jake said, dismounting. He helped Grace down, and her legs nearly gave out. She'd been tied up for so long that her muscles had forgotten how to work properly. Jake caught her elbow, steadying her. Easy now. Sit down while I get a fire started. Grace sank onto a smooth rock while Jake tended to the horse. He moved with efficient purpose, unsaddling the mare and checking her hooves. Then he gathered dried brush, and within minutes had a small fire crackling in the cave entrance. The flickering light revealed more of his face. He had a scar along his jawline and calluses on his hands from hard work, but his eyes remained kind even as he cleaned a rifle with practiced movements. You expecting them tonight? Grace asked. No, but I don't plan to be caught unprepared. He set the rifle aside and pulled jerky and hardtack from his saddlebag. It's not much. It's everything, Grace said, taking the offered food she hadn't eaten in nearly 2 days. They sat in silence for a while, the fire popping and the distant sound of a night bird calling. Grace studied this man who'd upended his life for hers. What happened to your family's ranch? She asked. Pa died 3 years back. Hart gave out. Ma followed him 6 months later. Daniel inherited the land, but he wanted his own place, something he and Rebecca built together. I respected that. Was working as a ranch hand, saving money to buy my own spread. The money you spent on me. Jake looked at her across the fire. Money comes and goes, but I couldn't let them do whatever they planned with you. Some things matter more than dreams about land. Grace felt tears sting her eyes. She'd lost everything. Her uncle, the other travelers, her belongings, her dignity. These past weeks had been a nightmare of violence and fear, and now this stranger had thrown away his future to give her a chance. I don't even know how to repay you, she said quietly. Don't want repayment. Just want to see you safe. Where are we going? Jake poked at the fire with a stick. There's a town called Redemption about 40 miles northwest. Sheriff there is a good man named Cooper Hayes. He's been trying to bring law to these territories. If we can reach him, he'll help us. And the gang? They'll come after us. Burns doesn't forget a slight, and I made him look weak in front of his men. Plus, I know his operation now. He can't let me reach a lawman. Grace wrapped her arms around herself. So we're running toward help with killers behind us. That's about the size of it. Jake met her eyes. I won't lie to you, Grace. The next few days are going to be dangerous. But I've got a good horse. I know this country, and I'm not an easy man to kill. We've got a fighting chance. How did you know my name? You said it, just now. Grace realized he was right. She'd been so deep in fear these past weeks that she'd barely spoken. Grace Miller. My uncle was Peter Miller. We were heading to California. Where are you from? St. Joseph, Missouri. My parents died of fever 2 years ago. Uncle Peter was my only family. He promised to take me west, help me start fresh. Her voice broke. Now he's dead too. Jake was quiet for a long moment. My ma used to say that God puts people where they need to be. Maybe that's why our paths crossed today. You believe that? I believe we make our own meaning. And right now, keeping you alive feels like the most important thing I've ever done. The fire crackled between them. Grace felt something shift inside her, a tiny spark of hope in the darkness that had consumed her. Tell me about Redemption, she said. What's it like? Jake's expression softened slightly. Growing town. Got a church, a school, a real main street with shops. People there are trying to build something decent. It's not perfect, but it's honest. The kind of place where a person could start over if they wanted. Is that what you think I should do? Start over? I think you should do whatever feels right once you're safe. But yes, Redemption seems like a place where someone could heal. Grace nodded slowly. And what about you? After you get me to safety? Jake's jaw tightened. I've got unfinished business with Charlie Burns. Revenge? Justice. There's a difference. Grace wasn't sure she believed that, but she didn't argue. This man had saved her life. She wouldn't judge how he chose to live his. They talked into the night, sharing small pieces of their pasts. Jake told her about growing up wild in the territories, learning to ride before he could properly walk, listening to his father's stories about building something lasting. Grace talked about her father's church, her mother's garden, the life she'd known before fever took it all away. Eventually exhaustion claimed her. Grace's eyes grew heavy. "Sleep," Jake said. "I'll keep watch. You need rest too. I'll manage."
"You've been through hell.
"Let me give you one night of peace." Grace wanted to protest, but her body had other ideas. She curled up near the fire, using Jake's bedroll, and within minutes, sleep pulled her under. She dreamed of home, her mother singing in the kitchen, her father's deep voice reading scripture, the smell of bread baking. Then the dreams turned dark, and she was back in the wagon, hearing screams, watching flames. She jerked awake with a gasp. Jake was beside her instantly. "Hey, you're all right." "Just a dream." Grace's breath came in ragged gasps. The cave walls pressed in around her. "Look at me," Jake said gently. "You're safe. I'm here. Nothing's gonna hurt you." His steady presence anchored her. Grace focused on his eyes, that calm certainty, and slowly her panic receded. "Sorry," she whispered. "Nothing to apologize for. You've earned a few nightmares." They sat together in the firelight, and Grace realized that for the first time in weeks, she didn't feel completely alone. This stranger with his quiet strength had given her something more valuable than freedom. That decent people still existed in a brutal world. "Thank you," she said again, "for everything." Jake nodded. "Get some more rest." Tomorrow's going to be a hard ride, but Grace noticed he didn't promise it would be safe, because they both knew that somewhere behind them, angry men were coming. And the real test of Jake Sutton's courage was still ahead. Dawn broke cold and pink over the canyon rim. Jake had the mare saddled before Grace fully woke. He'd clearly been up all night, standing watch. His eyes were rimmed with red, but his hands remained steady as he checked his weapons. "We need to move," he said. "I heard horses about an hour ago. They're behind us, maybe 5 miles. Grace's stomach dropped. "They tracked us in the dark?" "Burns has a tracker named Cole Brennan. Half Apache. Best there is. I was hoping we'd have more time." They mounted up and rode hard, leaving the cave behind. The canyon opened into rolling hills dotted with scrub and cactus. Jake pushed the mare fast but not recklessly, saving her strength for when they'd need it most. "How many men does Burns have?" Grace asked. "Last count, maybe 8 or 9. But only 4 or 5 will chase us. He can't leave his operation unprotected." "Those aren't good odds." "No," Jake agreed. "They're not." They rode through the morning, the sun climbing hot and merciless. Grace's lips cracked from thirst, but Jake rationed their water carefully. He seemed to know exactly where he was going, following trails that Grace couldn't even see. Around midday, they crested a rise, and Jake pulled up short. Below them, the land dropped away into a wide valley. In the distance, Grace could see buildings. "Is that Redemption?" she asked hopefully. "No, that's Broken Ridge. Worse than where we started." Jake studied the town with narrowed eyes. "But we might be able to use it. How?" "Burns knows I'm heading for Redemption. He'll expect me to avoid Broken Ridge, so maybe we ride straight through it. Hide in plain sight? That sounds insane. Most good plans do." Jake turned the mare. "There's another way around, but it adds 6 hours, and I don't think we have 6 hours." "What do you think?" Grace was startled that he was asking her opinion. "You're the one who knows these places, and you're the one who's been surviving hell for 3 weeks. Your instincts are probably better than mine right now." Grace thought about it. The fear that had dominated her for so long suddenly felt different. Not paralyzing, but sharpening. If they expect us to avoid it, then maybe going through is exactly right. But we need a disguise or something. If people recognize us, word will spread. Jake smiled, and it transformed his serious face. "You're thinking like an outlaw. I like it." He dug in his saddlebag and pulled out an old coat. "Put this on. Pull your hair up under my spare hat. We'll ride in like a couple of ranch hands looking for supplies." Grace did as he suggested. The coat was too big, but it hid her torn dress. The hat covered her blonde hair. She wouldn't pass close inspection, but from a distance she might look like a young man. "How do I look?" she asked.
"Like trouble."
Perfect. They rode down into Broken Ridge an hour later. The town was exactly what Grace expected. Ramshackle buildings, A saloon doing brisk business despite the early hour, men lounging in doorways with guns on their hips. Eyes tracked them as they entered, but no one challenged them. Jake rode straight to the general store and dismounted. "Stay close," he murmured to Grace. Inside, the store was dim and musty. An old man behind the counter watched them with suspicious eyes. "Need supplies," Jake said. "Jerky, hardtack, ammunition for a Winchester, and water. That'll be $6. Jake paid without haggling. The old man gathered their goods slowly, clearly hoping to overhear something useful. Jake ignored him, examining a displayed knife with casual interest. "You boys heading north?" the old man asked. "South," Jake lied easily. "Got work waiting in Tucson. Long ride. We're used to it." The door banged open and 3 men walked in. Grace's blood went cold. She recognized one of them from the auction, a tall man with a scar running from his eye to his chin. He'd been one of the loudest bidders. Jake's hand moved fractionally closer to his gun. The scarred man looked right at Grace, but didn't seem to recognize her in the oversized coat and hat. He walked to the counter. "Whiskey and information."
You seen a cowboy come through here with a blonde woman?
The old storekeeper's eyes flicked to Jake and Grace. Grace saw calculation in that glance. Saw him weighing the value of information against the danger of getting involved. "Haven't seen anyone matching that description," the old man said slowly. The scarred man grunted. "Burns is offering $100 for information leading to them. You change your mind, send word to the trading post." "Will do." The 3 men left, and the store fell silent. The old man finished bagging their supplies without another word. But as Jake took the goods, the storekeeper spoke quietly. "There's a back door. Leads to the alley. Your mare will be visible at the front another 5 minutes before people start wondering." Jake met his eyes. "Why help us?" "Because I knew Daniel Sutton. He bought supplies here before heading out with his wife. Good people. Didn't deserve what happened." The old man paused. "Get moving." They went out the back into a narrow alley. Jake moved quickly but carefully, leading Grace through the maze of buildings. They circled around to where the mare was hitched, mounted up, and rode out of town at a steady pace. Not running, which would draw attention, but not dawdling either. "That was close," Grace breathed once they'd cleared the last buildings. "Too close." "They're spreading out, trying to cut off our routes." Jake kicked the mare into a faster pace. "We've got maybe 3 hours before that scarred man realizes who we were." "Will he?" "Eventually. He's not smart, but he's persistent. And once he tells Burns, they'll know we went through Broken Ridge. They'll figure out we're taking the direct route to redemption now." "Can we make it?" Jake's jaw set in a hard line. "We're going to try." They rode through the afternoon, the landscape growing rockier. Grace's body ached from the constant riding, but she didn't complain. Behind them, somewhere in the dust and heat, killers were closing in. The race was on, and there would be no second chances. As the sun started to sink toward the horizon, Jake pulled up at the top of a ridge. He studied the land behind them with careful attention. "What is it?" Grace asked. "Dust. About 3 miles back. 4, maybe 5 riders. Can we outrun them?" Jake looked at their exhausted mare, then at the setting sun. "Not in the dark. The horse is tired, and the trail gets treacherous ahead. If we push too hard, we'll break a leg and be finished. So what do we do?" Jake pointed to a cluster of rocks about half a mile ahead. "We ford up there. Make them come to us on our terms. Maybe hold them off until dawn, then make a run for redemption. It's only about 15 miles from here." "Fight them?" "Only if they force it. But I've got a rifle, a pistol, and a good position. Sometimes that's enough to make men think twice." They rode to the rocks and dismounted. Jake positioned the mare in a protected spot, then set up their position carefully. The rocks formed a natural barrier with clear sightlines in all directions. He checked his ammunition, loaded his rifle, and settled in to wait. Grace sat beside him, her heart pounding. The sun painted the sky orange and red, beautiful and terrible. "Are you scared?" she asked. "Yes," Jake said simply. "Only a fool wouldn't be, but fear can be useful. Keeps you sharp. Ridden straight to redemption yourself." Jake looked at her, and in the fading light his eyes were fierce. "That's not who I am. And I don't think that's who you are either. You could have given up weeks ago, but you survived. You're stronger than you know." Grace felt something warm spread through her chest. Not love, not yet, but something equally powerful. Recognition. This man saw her not as a victim, but as a person with courage. "Thank you for believing that," she whispered. "I don't believe it. I know it. Darkness fell, and with it came the sound of approaching horses. Jake raised his rifle, peering into the shadows. "Stop there," he called out. "I've got you in my sights. Turn around and ride away." "Nobody has to die tonight." Laughter echoed from the darkness. A voice Grace recognized as belonging to the scarred man called back, "That's not how this works, Sutton. Burns wants you dead and the girl back. We can do this easy or hard. Your choice." "Here's my choice," Jake said. "You come up these rocks and I start shooting. First one who shows himself gets a bullet. Second one, too. Maybe the third makes it close enough to matter, but I doubt it. You boys really want to die for Charlie Burns?" Silence greeted this. Grace could imagine the men below weighing their options, none of them wanting to be the first up the rocks. Then the scarred man spoke again. "Burns is offering $500 to whoever brings him Sutton's body. That's a lot of money, boys." A shot rang out, striking the rock near Jake's head. He ducked, cursed, and returned fire. The muzzle flash lit up the night for a brief instant. A cry of pain suggested he'd hit something. "Anyone else?" Jake shouted. More shots answered, a barrage that sent chips of stone flying. Jake and Grace pressed flat against the rocks. The mare whinnied in fear. "They're trying to pin us down," Jake said. "Keep us here until daylight when they'll have better aim." "What do? We wait, and we don't give them an easy target." The night stretched long and terrible. The men below kept up sporadic fire, never exposing themselves but keeping Jake and Grace pinned. Jake fired back occasionally, more to remind them he was dangerous than with any hope of hitting someone in the dark. Grace huddled beside him, flinching at every shot. Her hands trembled, but she forced herself to stay calm. Falling apart now wouldn't help anyone. "Tell me about your ranch," she said quietly during the lull. "The one you were going to buy." Jake glanced at her, surprised. "Why?" "Because I want to think about something other than dying, and because I want to know what you gave up for me." Jake was quiet for a moment. Then he began to speak, his voice low. "There's a valley about 20 miles west of Redemption. Green grass, good water, trees for shade. I saw it last year while tracking strays. Perfect place for cattle. I was going to buy 100 acres, build a house, maybe find a wife, start something that would last. You still could. Maybe, if we live through tonight." Another barrage of shots interrupted them. Jake fired back, his face grim in the muzzle flash. "I'm sorry," Grace said, "for costing you your dream." Jake looked at her, and even in the darkness, she could see the intensity in his expression. "Grace, you didn't cost me anything. I made a choice. And sitting here right now, even with bullets flying, I'd make the same choice again. Some things matter more than land." Grace felt tears sting her eyes, but she blinked them back. This wasn't the time for crying. This was the time for surviving. The night wore on, hour by terrible hour. The shooting eventually stopped as the men below settled in to wait for dawn. Jake took the opportunity to check their ammunition. "How are we doing?" Grace asked. 20 rounds for the rifle?" 6 in the pistol. Enough if we're careful." He paused. "When the sun comes up, they're going to rush us. They know we can't hold out forever. So what's the plan? Soon as there's enough light to see, we make a run for it. Ride hard for redemption."
Don't stop for anything.
"They'll chase us.
Yes.
But we'll have a head start, and the mare has had some rest. It's our best shot." Grace nodded. She didn't point out that their best shot still involved riding 15 miles with killers behind them. They both knew the odds. "Jake," she said softly. "Yeah?" "If something happens to me, I want you to know that today was the first day in 3 weeks I felt like a human being again. You gave me that. Whatever happens, thank you." Jake's hand found hers in the darkness.
"Squeeze gently. Nothing's gonna happen to you."
"I promise." Grace wanted to believe him, but as the stars wheeled overhead and dawn crept closer, she knew that some promises were impossible to keep. All they had was each other and the coming light, and somewhere beyond the darkness, the town of Redemption waited like a prayer neither of them was sure would be answered. The first rays of dawn painted the sky purple and gold. Jake was already moving, saddling the mare with quick, efficient motions. Grace helped where she could, her hands steadier than she expected. "Remember," Jake said, "when we ride out, stay low. They'll shoot, but most men can't hit a moving target at distance. Just hold on and trust the horse." "I trust you," Grace said. Jake met her eyes, and something passed between them, a connection forged in fire and fear. Then he swung into the saddle and pulled Grace up behind him. "Now," he said, and kicked the mare into a gallop. They burst from the rocks as the men below scrambled to react. Shots rang out immediately, the crack of rifles splitting the morning air. Jake bent low over the mare's neck, shielding Grace with his body. A bullet whined past Grace's ear. Another kicked up dirt beside them. The mare ran like her life depended on it, because it did. Jake guided her with expert hands, weaving between obstacles, using every dip and rise in the land for cover. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit. Men shouting, horses being pushed hard. But Jake's head start was giving them precious distance.
How far? Grace shouted over the pounding hooves.
10 miles. Damaging, maybe less. The land flew past in a blur. The mare was tiring. Grace could feel it in the animal's labored breathing. But she kept running, giving everything she had. A shot struck closer, and the mare stumbled. Grace's heart seized, but the horse recovered and kept going. They'd been grazed, not seriously hit. "Come on, girl," Jake urged. "Just a little farther." The sun climbed higher, turning the air hot. Grace's throat was parched, but there was no time to stop. Behind them, the pursuit continued relentlessly. They were running a race where second place meant death. Then, in the distance, Grace saw buildings. "Is that it?" "That's redemption," Jake confirmed. "Hold on." He pushed the mare harder, asking for speed she didn't have. The horse gave it anyway, finding reserves of strength from somewhere deep. They thundered toward the town, and Grace could now see people in the streets turning to watch. A shot struck the ground right beside them. Their pursuers were getting closer, desperate to stop them before they reached safety. "Almost there," Jake said through gritted teeth. They hit the edge of town at full gallop. Jake headed straight for a building with a star painted on the door, the sheriff's office. He pulled the mare to a sliding stop and practically threw Grace off the saddle before dismounting himself. The door burst open and a man in his 50s with a sheriff's badge stepped out, hand on his gun. "What in the hell? Cooper Hayes?" Jake asked. "That's me." "Jake Sutton?" "Daniel Sutton was my brother, and these men chasing us killed him." 5 riders thundered into town, pulling up short when they saw the sheriff. The scarred man in the lead glared at Jake with pure hatred. Sheriff Hayes looked from Jake to the riders and back. His hand stayed on his gun. "Somebody want to tell me what's going on here?" "Those men are part of Charlie Burns' gang," Jake said. "They've been chasing us since yesterday. They killed my brother and his wife 2 months ago, and they held this woman captive, planning to sell her." The scarred man spat. "That's a lie." "Sutton stole Burns' property. We're just collecting what's owed." "Property?" Sheriff Hayes' voice went cold. "You calling this woman property? She was purchased legal at auction. No auction involving a human being is legal, you damned fool." Hayes stepped forward, and now his gun was drawn. "You boys need to turn around and ride out." The scarred man's hand drifted toward his weapon. "Burns won't forget this, Hayes. You're protecting criminals." "I'm protecting the law, something you boys wouldn't recognize if it bit you. Now get before I decide to arrest the lot of you." For a long moment, the standoff held. Then the scarred man cursed and wheeled his horse around. The others followed, but not before throwing venomous looks at Jake and Grace. As the riders left town, Sheriff Hayes holstered his gun and turned to Jake. "Now then, let's hear the whole story." They went inside, and Jake told everything. The ambush that killed Daniel and Rebecca. Tracking the gang. The desperate ride to redemption. Hayes listened without interrupting, his weathered face growing grimmer with each detail. "Charlie Burns," he said when Jake finished. "Been trying to pin something on him for 5 years. He's careful. Keeps his hands clean. This is the first solid evidence I've had." "He murdered my brother," Jake said. "I want justice. And you'll get it. But legal justice, not a bullet in the back." Hayes looked at Grace. "Miss, you've been through an ordeal. There's a boarding house run by a widow named Martha Collins. Good woman. She'll give you a room and proper care while we sort this out." Grace felt tears threaten again. After weeks of horror, the simple kindness of strangers offering help was almost too much. "Thank you. Jake, you'll need to write out a statement. Detail everything you saw and heard. Then we'll organize a posse and go get Burns." Hayes paused. "Your brother was a good man. I'm sorry for your loss." Jake nodded, emotion flickering across his face. "He was the best man I knew." The next hour passed in a blur. Grace was taken to the boarding house, where Martha Collins clucked over her like a mother hen. A bath was drawn, clean clothes provided, and a real meal served. Grace ate slowly, barely believing it was real. Later, sitting in a sun-filled room with actual curtains and a real bed, Grace stared out the window at Redemption's main street. She was safe. After everything, she'd actually survived. A knock came at the door. "It's Jake." Grace opened it to find him cleaned up, the trail dust washed away. He looked different somehow. Younger, less grim. "How are you doing?" he asked. "I'm not sure yet." "It doesn't feel real. I know what you mean." Jake hesitated. "Sheriff Hayes wants to ride out tomorrow with a posse. He asked if I'd guide them to the trading post. Will you go?" "I have to. Burns needs to answer for what he did." Grace understood, but fear clutched at her heart. "Be careful, please." "I will." Jake looked at her with those steady blue eyes. "Grace, I wanted to tell you something before I go. These past 2 days, riding with you, fighting beside you, it meant something to me. You're one of the bravest people I've ever met. I was terrified the whole time. Courage isn't the absence of fear, it's moving forward despite it. You did that. You survived. When this is over, when Burns is in jail or worse, I'm still going to buy that ranch. But I was wondering if maybe you'd consider staying in Redemption. Not with me necessarily, but just in town, so I could see you sometimes. Get to know you proper without people shooting at us." Grace felt warmth spread through her chest. This man who'd given up his dreams for her was asking for nothing except the chance to know her better. "I'd like that," she said softly. "I'd like that very much." Jake smiled, and it transformed his entire face. "Good. That's good." He reached out and squeezed her hand gently. "I need to go help Hayes prepare, but I'll be back. I promise." Grace watched him go, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, she felt something other than fear or grief. She felt hope. The next morning, Grace stood with Martha Collins and a dozen other townspeople as Sheriff Hayes' posse rode out. Jake sat tall in his saddle, rifle ready, face determined. He caught Grace's eye and nodded once before turning his horse north. "That's a good man," Martha said. "Jake Sutton. Known him since he was a boy. His brother, too." "Terrible what happened to Daniel." "Jake says he's going to buy a ranch," Grace said. "He will, too." Jake's the type who finishes what he starts. Martha looked at Grace shrewdly. "You sweet on him?" Grace felt her cheeks heat. "I barely know him. Sometimes that's all it takes. One moment that shows you who someone really is." Martha patted her arm. "Come on. No sense standing here worrying. Let's get some breakfast." But Grace found she couldn't eat. She kept thinking about Jake riding toward danger. The man who'd saved her was now risking his life again, this time for justice. The day crawled past. Grace helped Martha with chores, grateful for the distraction. Other women in town stopped by, bringing fruit and kind words. They'd heard about her ordeal, and their sympathy was genuine. Redemption was earning its name. As evening fell, Grace sat on the boarding house porch, watching the sunset paint the sky. She was just starting to wonder if she'd hear anything tonight when dust appeared on the horizon. Riders. The posse was returning. Grace stood, her heart in her throat. She counted the horses as they entered town. 1, 2, 3, all the way up to 12. Everyone who'd left had come back. The riders stopped at the sheriff's office, and Grace hurried over. She saw Jake dismounting, tired but unharmed. Relief flooded through her so strongly her knees went weak. Jake saw her, and his face softened. He walked over, leading his horse. "We got him," he said. "Burns and 4 of his men."
"I locked up in Hayes' jail. The rest scattered when they saw the size of our posse."
"Anyone hurt?" "Few cuts and bruises. Burns tried to shoot his way out, but we were ready for him." "It's over, Grace. Really over." Grace felt tears stream down her face. She didn't bother hiding them. "You did it. We did it. You survived long enough for me to find you." "That took more courage than anything I did." Sheriff Hayes approached, looking satisfied. "Burns is talking, trying to make deals. Already confessed to the murders of Daniel and Rebecca Sutton, plus a dozen other crimes. He'll hang or rot in prison. Either way, he won't hurt anyone else." Jake's jaw clenched at the mention of his brother, but he nodded. "Thank you, Sheriff. Thank you for bringing this to me. Justice has been a long time coming in these parts." Hayes tipped his hat to Grace. "Miss Miller, you're free to go wherever you choose. But if you want to stay in Redemption, you'd be welcome. We can always use good people." After Hayes left, Jake and Grace stood together in the gathering darkness. "So," Jake said, "I guess this is where we figure out what happens next." "What do you want to happen?" Grace asked. Jake took a deep breath. "I want to buy that ranch." build a house, maybe get some cattle started. And I want to do it knowing that somewhere nearby you're building a life too. Maybe teaching at the school or working at the general store or whatever makes you happy. And maybe if you're willing, we could see each other regular. Take walks. Have dinners. Get to know each other the way normal people do. Grace smiled through her tears. That sounds perfect. Yeah? Yeah. Jake's expression turned serious. I need you to know I'm not expecting anything. You've been through hell. You need time to heal, to figure out who you are without fear hanging over you. I just want the chance to be there while you do. As a friend, or maybe someday as something more. But only if that's what you want. Grace reached out and took his hand. Jake Sutton, you rode into hell and pulled me out. You gave up your dream to save a stranger. You're the first person in weeks who made me remember that decent people exist. So yes, I want to know you better. I want to build a life here. And I want to see where this leads. Jake squeezed her hand gently. I can't promise it'll be easy. I'm just a cowboy with more scars than sense. But I can promise I'll never give you reason to fear me. And I'll spend every day trying to deserve the gift you're giving me. What gift? A second chance. At happiness. At building something good. Grace stood on her toes and kissed his cheek. Then let's start building. Over the following weeks, Redemption became home. Grace took a job helping at the school, teaching the younger children their letters. She rented a small room at Martha's boarding house and slowly began to stitch together the pieces of her broken life. Jake worked hard, saving every dollar. He visited his brother's grave regularly, and Grace often went with him. They'd stand together in silence, honoring Daniel and Rebecca's memory. True to his word, Jake courted her properly. Sunday walks. Dinners at the town's small restaurant. Long conversations on Martha's porch as the sun set. He was patient, never pushing, always respectful. And slowly, Grace's fear faded, replaced by something warmer and more lasting. 3 months after that desperate ride into town, Jake had enough money to make a down payment on his land. The valley he'd described was everything he'd promised. Green grass, good water, and endless possibility. Come see it, he said to Grace one Sunday after church. They rode out together, and Grace felt her breath catch at the beauty. It was peaceful, protected, perfect. What do you think? Jake asked. It's wonderful. You're going to build something amazing here. Jake dismounted and helped her down. They walked through the tall grass, and he pointed out where he'd put the house, the barn, the corrals. Grace, he said, stopping and turning to face her. These past months have been the best of my life. Getting to know you, watching you heal and grow strong again, it's been an honor. And I know it's soon. I know you might not be ready, but I have to ask. He took both her hands in his. I'm not just building a ranch. I'm building a life. And I can't imagine that life without you in it. Not as a visitor or a friend, but as a partner. As my wife, if you'll have me. Grace's heart swelled. She looked at this man who'd saved her, protected her, courted her with such gentle patience. The man who'd given up everything for a stranger and never once asked for anything in return. Yes, she said. Yes, Jake. I'll marry you. He swept her into his arms, and they kissed there in the tall grass with the sun shining down and the future spreading out before them like a promise finally kept. They were married a month later in Redemption's small church. Sheriff Hayes gave Grace away, and Martha Collins cried happy tears. The whole town came to celebrate, because Grace and Jake's story had become part of Redemption's story. A story about how, even in the darkest times, courage and kindness could win. As Grace stood beside Jake speaking her vows, she thought about that terrible day at the auction. The burlap sack over her head, the fear that had consumed her, and then Jake lifting that sack away, revealing himself to be not a monster but a guardian angel in cowboy clothes. I love you, she whispered as they were pronounced husband and wife. I love you too, Jake replied. My angel. They built their ranch together, stone by stone, fence post by fence post. It wasn't easy. The land was hard, and money was tight. But they worked side by side, partners in every sense of the word. Grace taught school and Redemption during the week, then helped Jake on weekends. She learned to rope cattle, mend fences, and birth foals. Jake learned to read her moods, to know when she needed space to process old fears and when she needed him close. Sheriff Hayes eventually captured the rest of Burns's gang. Charlie Burns himself was sentenced to hang, and Jake attended the execution. Grace went with him, holding his hand as justice was finally served for Daniel and Rebecca. It's done, Jake said afterward. We can let it go now. And they did. They turned their attention to the future rather than the past, to building something lasting and good. A year after their wedding, Grace discovered she was pregnant. Jake wept when she told him, tears of pure joy. They named their first child Daniel, after the brother whose death had set everything in motion. As Grace rocked little Daniel in the home she and Jake had built, she often thought about fate and chance, about how the worst day of her life had led to the best, about how a cowboy with steady blue eyes had lifted a burlap sack and seen not a victim, but a person worth saving. "What are you thinking about?" Jake asked one evening, coming in from the barn. "About how lucky I am," Grace said. "How we both are." Jake kissed her forehead. "Not luck, Grace. Just Grace." She smiled, understanding the wordplay. But he was right in more ways than one. Grace had saved them both. Not just her name, but the concept. The undeserved kindness that Jake had shown her. The forgiveness she'd extended to herself for surviving when others hadn't. The choice to build rather than destroy. They'd both been given grace, and they'd chosen to pass it on. Years later, when their children were grown and the ranch was thriving, Jake and Grace would sit on their porch and watch the sunset paint the sky. They rarely talked about that desperate ride anymore. But sometimes, when the light hit just right, Grace would catch Jake looking at her with that same expression he'd worn when he first lifted the sack from her head, like she was an angel, like she was worth everything. "What?" she'd ask, smiling. "Just remembering," Jake would say. "Just grateful." And Grace would take his weathered hand in hers, these hands that had built a life together, and she'd be grateful too. For second chances, for courage in dark times, for a cowboy who'd ridden into hell and brought her home. The ranch they built stood for generations, a testament to what two broken people could create when they refused to let darkness win. And in redemption, the story of Jake and Grace Sutton became legend, the cowboy who gave up his dream to save a stranger, the woman who survived the unsurvivable, and the love they built from ashes and hope. Some stories end in tragedy, but this one, born from tragedy, ended in triumph. In a ranch house filled with laughter. In children and grandchildren who grew up knowing that courage and kindness matter. In two people who found each other in the worst circumstances and chose to build the best life. Grace kept one reminder of that terrible time. A small piece of burlap, tucked away in a box. She'd look at it occasionally and remember. Not to dwell on the pain, but to honor how far she'd come. To remember that darkness doesn't last forever. That even when a sack covers your head and hope seems impossible, sometimes Grace arrives wearing a cowboy hat and riding a gray mare. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, that Grace stays forever. The sun set over their valley, painting the grass gold. Jake and Grace sat together, hands intertwined, watching their legacy spread out before them. The ranch, the family, the life they'd built against all odds. "No regrets?" Grace asked softly. Jake looked at her, and his eyes still held that same steady certainty they'd had the day he saved her. "Not a single one," he said. "You are worth everything. You are everything." And as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Grace Miller Sutton smiled. Because she'd learned something important in her journey from hell to home. Sometimes the worst moments lead to the best lives. Sometimes a cowboy lifts a sack and sees an angel. And sometimes angels are just people who refuse to give up, even when giving up would be easier. She'd been sold with a sack over her head, but Jake had lifted it, seen her true worth, and given her back her life. And in return, she'd given him a reason to believe that dreams deferred weren't dreams denied, just dreams waiting for the right partner to help make them real. Together, they'd built a kingdom from dust, a family from loneliness, a future from a past that could have destroyed them both. That was the real story. Not the terror or the chase or even the rescue, but what came after. The choice to build rather than break, to love rather than fear. To trust that tomorrow could be better than yesterday, even when yesterday had been darkness. Grace squeezed Jake's hand and he squeezed back. No words needed. They understood each other in that deep way that comes from surviving together, from building together, from choosing each other every single day. The ranch lights flickered on as their family prepared dinner. Voices drifted from the house, laughter and conversation, the sound of home. Jake stood and offered Grace his hand. "Come on, Angel, let's go eat." Grace took his hand and let him pull her to her feet. After all these years, he still called her Angel. After all these years, she still felt her heart skip when he did. They walked toward the house together, two people who'd found each other in hell and built heaven. Two people who'd proven that sometimes the best stories start with the worst moments. Two people who'd looked at darkness and chosen light. Behind them, the valley stretched out in the twilight. Their valley, their ranch. And above them, the first stars appeared, bearing witness to a love born from courage and sustained by grace. The kind of love that builds legacies. The kind of love that saves souls. The kind of love that starts when a cowboy lifts a sack, sees an angel, and decides that some things are worth more than dreams. Some things are worth everything. Grace had been sold as property, but Jake had seen her as precious, and together they'd proven that the human spirit, when met with kindness instead of cruelty, can transform tragedy into triumph. That was their story. Not just survival, but transcendence. Not just escape, but arrival. Not just rescue, but redemption. And it all started with a simple act of grace, performed by a cowboy who understood that true wealth isn't measured in land or gold, but in the lives we touch and the love we give. They reached the house, and Jake opened the door for her. Grace stepped inside, to warmth and light and family, and she knew with absolute certainty that she was finally, truly home. The end.